How much does a video game cost, and can you tell by just looking at the actual store? Well, the answer is you can tell what it will cost for you. And here, I'm not talking about just seeing whether a game is on sale or maybe how greedy a publisher is feeling. What I'm talking about is, quite literally, how lucky you personally are. That's because PlayStation are now manipulating prices on their store. An investigation discovered that they were quietly testing personalized pricing in dozens of regions. Now, that was bad enough, but since the story broke, it's actually gotten worse. The experiment has expanded to the US, and they're now testing multiple discounts in each test. And this is where your sale price for a video game may be higher than the sale price that your friends are getting. This is obviously a dangerous path, because the worst possible version of this is a future where gaming could have the same dynamic pricing as concert tickets and flights. I don't think any of us want that. But first, there's a big gaming data breach you really need to be aware of. It actually impacted me and one of my editors. So Star Citizen just disclosed a breach, a quote, systemic and sophisticated attack. It involved player data being accessed, including names, emails, dates of birth, and Cloud Imperium sat on it for over a month before they told anyone. And that's just the latest. We even had a scare last year on Steam with 89 million records allegedly being leaked. So the pattern is clear. Your data gets out there, and when it does, data brokers gobble it up. There are companies whose entire business is buying and reselling your personal data. And once it's in that ecosystem, it circulates. And that is what today's sponsor, Incogni, deals with. You sign up. They then identify which brokers have your data. They send removal requests on your behalf, and they do this not one-off, they do it continuously. This saves you hours of paperwork because you do have a legal right to get that stuff taken down, but of course, actually using your legal right is just not something people will do because it's loads of manual work. So Incogni just handles all of it. And here's a look at my dashboard. 257 requests sent across 48 brokers, 250 completed, an average resolution time of 12 days, and 21 brokers actively being monitored to make sure my data stays down. And even just looking through the names of the brokers, man, some of them are real shady. So go to incogni.com/Bellular News. Use code Bellular News and you'll get 60% off an annual plan. And that is just at the link down below in the description. Assassin's Creed Unity just got a 60 FPS update for the PS5. It's a great time to check that game out, and you know what? That is a game that in many technical ways was so ahead of its time. Now, at least one person did check this game out, and when they were logged in their account, it cost $9.99 USD. But then they logged out and found it only cost $3.74. A bit weird. Maybe a bug. Turns out it's not a bug. Turns out it's the tip of an iceberg. And that leads me to PS prices. They've been tracking this for months, and they're a site where players can compare prices and get the best deal by tracking the API of the PSN store. And in doing that, they discovered that certain games on the store have had unusual offer structures containing experimental identifiers in the API responses. These are codes like IPT pilot and IPT OPR testing. Those are basically labels for a formal pricing experiment. Now, the first experiment was 50 games from third-party publishers across 30 regions, and it ran since November. Some people were shown games like Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 at nearly 15% off. Others weren't. So it was the same game, and it would just be a different price depending on who you are. One couple, as an example, found they were being shown different prices for Red Dead Redemption 2 on the same console. So the price is whatever PlayStation's algorithm, I guess, decided you deserve. Or maybe it's just dumb luck. But this has not been a one-off. As soon as Redditors flagged this, and thanks Push Square for signal blasting it, people started connecting the dots. The API find meant that this was a formal program, but reports of situational discounts go as far back as 2022. There were random cases of games like Astrobot getting 20% discounts shortly after launch, and it seems it has since expanded by quite a deal. As of February, the testing now includes first-party Sony games and far more publishers across far more territories, nearly 140 games across almost 70 regions. So it's well past the stage of being a small experiment, and it does go further. It's not just applying discounts to base prices. It is applying personalized discounts to existing sales. Of course, all in service of targeting you, so that even as you pay less, you'll actually be paying more. But that raises a question. Why would PlayStation want to give some people cheaper games and not others? What if I told you I have a quote to answer that previous question? Here it is. "We intend to minimize the impact of increased memory costs on gaming going forward by prioritizing monetization of the existing base to date and striving to further expand our software and network services revenue." So that's what Sony CFO Lin Tao said whenever she was explaining to investors how they were going to deal with the data center crisis. "We are an existing resource that, of course, they can try to extract by just squeezing a little bit harder. Or by maybe doing some dynamic pricing in a way that people won't notice until it becomes a big news story. Of course, software and network revenue services is the PSN store and the 30% cut on sales that store gets. So it seems obvious, right? That this is all about testing how much people will pay for a game. And sure enough, in the US, a separate program called IPT LTM is now testing prices on a user-by-user basis. Some people are seeing a price for GTA 5 that's $3 more expensive than other people in the same sale. The future looks clear here, and we've seen this in other places. Flights, ticket events, and I think in the most recent and most upsetting, perhaps, example, grocery items. They all end up seeing prices surge in response to demand. So as much as those little e-ink price tags do seem like a cool thing and a great way to cut down on waste, well, they can also make dynamic pricing for groceries a hell of a lot easier. So I wouldn't blame you for worrying that surge pricing could even come to the PlayStation Store. Though there are reasons why that would not happen. Game keys are not a finite resource. This is not like Amazon raising the price of Pokemon Pokopia because there aren't enough physical copies. Demand outstripping supply just doesn't make sense for digital products. So the US test is far more about working out how much an individual needs to see a game discounted for before they are willing to pay. And most importantly, it's not just A/B testing whether there is or is not a discount. It isn't like you getting a personalized discount thing, say, what's going on the Xbox store. No, this is quite different. This is everyone getting the discount, but the discounts that everyone gets are different. And that's because it's all about building up aggregate revenue per user, and their way to do that, it's by profiling you. It's by looking at your spending habits, looking at all of that stuff, and looking at how you respond to sales, and then adjusting the prices accordingly. And if this all seems a bit insane to you, well, there is a reason why. Buying 2 games or fewer a year is in fact the reality for most US gamers, according to Circana's data. That's not true for me, probably not true for you, but that is most gamers in America. The people who are buying more are broadly buying regardless of price and often at launch. If PlayStation wants more revenue, they need to entice more people to buy games, and that means dropping price thresholds to the point where more people will consider a purchase. And now they can target that plan on a personal level. So if a game is worth a bunch to me, such that I'll buy it on a 30% discount, then that's great, they get that money. But for someone else, that game may only be worth a shot if it's 70% off. And if the game was never going to go to 70 or 50 or whatever that percentage would be, then that would just forever be no sale. And of course, it's literally just for a game key, so it costs pretty much nothing to deliver. So every person that they can convince to buy a game that they otherwise wouldn't have, by maybe offering them a bigger than average discount, well, for Sony, that is quite literally just more money. All this comes after an update in October 2025 to make the store a bit more transparent, with a newly added line in store pages that shows the lowest price a game has hit in the last 30 days. Now, in the ideal scenario, you would feel like you're getting a great deal because now you can see how cheap the game is right now for you. But I think you can see how that could be used. And since most first-party or large third-party games start at $70 and then get discounted, PlayStation is actually getting a better cut than ever, even with a discount being applied. More people buying more games, giving PlayStation more of its big juicy cut. In theory, it works out for almost everyone, right? Sony, developers, and even some players who just happen to get a great deal. But I said almost works, and almost is really doing the heavy lifting, because the only way targeted discounts work is if not everyone gets the discount. And whether you're on the right side of that line is not up to you, and as it turns out, that is, in some territories, not legal. When PS prices first reported on these tests, the USA and Japan were not included, and they believed that this was because of stricter regulation and higher market sensitivity. That's a direct quote. And in the US, there is state-level legislation on what they call surveillance pricing. And I have to say, that is an absolute banger of a word for dynamic pricing. That feels so much more accurate to, I guess, how it feels as someone who's hit by it. And of course, what Sony is doing would probably fall into that. But at least as of March of this year, that caution is now gone, and the US is in the experiment with 180 games, and that's actually the largest set in any region. And currently, Japan is the only market still excluded. And we can speculate why. It's their home region. Maybe if people notice these price experiments in the middle of a trade war or a weak currency market, then in Japan they would get very negative headlines. They actually had to do a region-lock SKU of the PS5 at a lower price point, basically because shit's getting real expensive for people in Japan. So they clearly decided that the risk wasn't worth it here. But obviously, this ain't the same everywhere. So let's do the EU. In the EU, this practice is not illegal, and the Digital Fairness Act consultation is not changing that. In the UK, it's the same story, even with the government investigating surge pricing after basically loads of concert ticket controversies. In other words, in most of the world, there is no real law stopping this sort of thing. And all of this does kind of make sense, because otherwise Xbox wouldn't have gotten away with it since 2022. Yeah, it's like the little fun secret we've held back for the end of the video. Xbox has been doing this for ages. They do these things called just for you sales that exist just to get personalized deals in front of audiences. Usually this means selling DLC or expansions for Game Pass content, but there's usually a caveat to that acceptability, and that's whether or not this pricing is used to protect a dominant market position. When it seems to be, that's when it can get a bit murkier. So if a company were the only source of a product and they were manipulating prices, well, that is where it could actually become a problem. And you have to remember, PlayStation banned third-party digital sales. They did that since 2019. So unlike with Xbox, you cannot go elsewhere to get your DLC or your games cheaper. There is no second shop, no alternative storefront. The price PlayStation shows you is the price PlayStation shows you, and that is that. That's the price that you'll pay. And as long as that walled garden stays up, there's nothing you can do about it. But in 10 weeks, that may no longer be true. As of this week, the UK class action against PlayStation's walled garden is actually going to trial. And over the next 10 weeks, they'll argue that PlayStation actively chooses to restrict third-party sales and that has harmed customers' options. Basically, they want to open up the walled garden. And if they win, then you would not have to rely on PlayStation deciding that you deserve the best deal, because you could just go elsewhere and find it. But right now, you cannot. Instead, PlayStation are running pricing experiments on their own customers in a store where those customers have no alternatives. You may then be paying more for a game than the person sitting next to you, and you'll never know. You can't compare, you can't leave, and PlayStation calls it dynamic pricing. I would say, while I do understand why they would do it, it just feels kinda unfair. And that's ultimately something that humans care a hell of a lot about. Even, and I think we all can, look at the logic here and sort of see, well, if that person would never buy that game unless it was on a really deep discount, and you can only really do that discount in a personalized deal, okay, sure, understandable. Because a company maybe wouldn't want to do that deep of a discount across the entire market and then just sell loads of copies at less money than they would need to. I mean, we can understand why a company would want to do that, right? To optimize their revenue per consumer at kind of all ends of that spectrum. But for me, it comes down to a simple, perhaps almost biologically essential fact. Fairness is really important for Homo sapiens. And maybe these big corporations should remember that their customers are Homo sapiens. We literally care about fairness a lot. This kind of thing has been studied, in development of like babies, toddlers, stuff like that. So whenever you start doing things that just feel unfair like this, oh, you really risk pissing off your customers. That is what PlayStation have done. And until their walled garden comes down, well, whether PlayStation gives you a good price or not is entirely their call, not yours. Good luck, I guess. I'll tell you who also needs good luck. The people who have got to try and get Battlefield 6 back on the right track, because they've just had some real bad news, and you can learn about it in this video next.